My name is Grace Whitfield, and what I am about to unveil is something I have carried in silence for years, so many years that the secret began to feel like a second heartbeat beneath my own. I have never said it aloud. Not to my parents. Not to my closest friend. Not even to myself in the safety of an empty room. It lived inside me like a sealed vault, like a tremor that never stops, like a light I was too afraid to open my hands around. I kept it buried because speaking it means admitting what I saw. And admitting what I saw means accepting what was asked of me. And accepting what was asked of me means acknowledging the weight I never wanted to carry back into this world. There is a reason I hesitated for so long. A reason I almost decided never to speak. A reason I feared this moment more than I feared death itself. Because the day I died, something stood beside me. Not the light. Not the warmth. Not the peace people describe when they soften their voices and speak of heavenly comfort. Something else. Something that reached me before the light ever had the chance. But I'll come back to that. I need you to hear my voice the way a soul hears the ocean under the floorboards of a dream, subtle, steady, unyielding. I need you to listen as though every word I speak is a key sliding into the lock of a door you didn't know existed inside you. I am not here to entertain you. I am not here to inspire you. I speak because I was commanded to speak, because my silence would be a kind of betrayal that my spirit cannot afford. You should know this before I go any further. I did not want to return. When my heart stopped, when the world loosened its grip on me, I felt something like relief, an unburdening, a soft release I had never known. And when I crossed that unseen line, when I felt the boundary between here and there melt beneath me, I tasted a reality so radiant that the earth itself felt unbearably dim in comparison. I did not want to come back. Not to my body. Not to my pain. Not to my unfinished life. But I was sent back. Not out of mercy. Not because I asked for it. Not because I deserved it. I returned out of obedience. In that other realm, where truth has weight, where vows burn like living fire, where intention is more visible than the skin you wear, something was placed upon me. A message. A warning. A burden. A responsibility that does not loosen even now as I speak these words. And with it came a vow: if I lived, I would speak. If breath entered my lungs again, I would not hide what I had seen. So now I speak. And I speak to you directly because the message I carry is not general, not distant, not metaphorical. It is immediate. It is specific. It touches your life more closely than the device you are holding in your hands. If you click away, you are not walking away from a story, you are walking away from a message that heaven forced me to return with. There are consequences to turning from something that was sent in your direction. And I need you to understand that. Because what I saw is not coming. It is already here. It is already interwoven with your habits, your desires, your choices, your digital life. It is disguised as light. It is wrapped in trends. It is hidden in plain sight. Something is trying to pull you. Subtly. Patiently. Relentlessly. And the most dangerous part is that you do not recognize the direction it pulls. He called my name in the dark. That is the refrain I live with now. The echo I cannot escape. The sound that reshaped my soul and demanded that I return. Why did he call me? Why did he choose someone like me, someone who was never holy, never remarkable, never worthy? What voice spoke my name when my body lay cold? Who stood beside me before the light appeared? What message was pressed into my hands? And what danger are you standing in right now, unaware? But I'll come back to that. First, understand this. Stay to the end, because the part heaven insisted I deliver is at the end. If you miss it, the consequences fall on you, not on this message. I did not return to soothe you. I did not return to comfort you. I did not return to narrate a beautiful experience. I returned because something is unfolding on this earth, and the veil over it is thinning. I returned because the presence that stood beside me, from the outside, I looked harmless. A regular, secular American woman. Harmless. Ordinary. Predictable. But the truth is that the soul does not harden all at once. It hardens grain by grain, disappointment by disappointment, refusal by refusal. And I was slowly hardening. I worked as a hospital administrative assistant, which is a title that sounds more organized than the job ever felt. I spent my days answering calls no one wanted to make, scheduling appointments that left people trembling, and sitting at a desk where grief was a daily visitor wearing different disguises. Burnout was my constant companion, an exhaustion so quiet and so deep that it never raised its voice, but it never left either. It lived in my shoulders. It lived in my lower back. It lived in the heaviness that wrapped itself around every morning. I told myself it was just stress. But stress becomes something darker when you begin to lose the ability to feel compassion, even in small amounts. And that was happening to me, inch by inch. Return to the fire. The fire of tenderness, of forgiveness, of presence. The fire I had long abandoned. Some days, I numbed myself with scrolling. Mindlessly dragging my thumb across my screen, tasting the counterfeit comfort of watching other people's lives, other people's joys, other people's tragedies. My phone became the universe I lived in. If I am honest, I worshipped it more than anything else. The blue-white glow of the screen replaced the warmth of real connection. I scrolled during lunch breaks. I scrolled in the bathroom at work. I scrolled in the parking lot before going inside. I scrolled until my mind felt blurred around the edges. Comfort scrolling, what a harmless phrase. But comfort can be a cage dressed like a blanket. Return to the fire. I was overworked, yes. But more dangerously, I was overstimulated and undernourished. I checked my notifications the way some people check their pulse. A comment meant more to me than a conversation. A like felt more reassuring than a moment of prayer I no longer believed in anyway. Validation became my oxygen. Without it, I would suffocate. With it, I would drown. I did not know then that drowning and suffocating can feel frighteningly similar. Forgiveness. That was another place where my soul was slowly dying. There was someone. A former friend. Someone whose name still tugged at something twisted inside my chest. We had once been close. Too close. And when the friendship ended, I built a shrine out of my resentment. I fed it. I polished it. I rehearsed its story in my head so often that bitterness became a familiar lullaby. I'll forgive her later, I said to myself. Later, when she apologizes. Later, when I feel ready. Later, when time erases what she did. Later, later, later. But later is a lie the soul tells itself when it is afraid to be free. I thought forgiveness could wait. I whispered that lie to myself just enough times for it to become a truth that poisoned me. Return to the fire. I wasn't evil. But I was slowly hardening, layer after layer, like clay left out in the sun. I didn't hate God, I simply forgot him. Forgot the quiet voice. Forgot the nudges. Forgot the warnings. Forgot the warmth that once lived inside me when I was younger and softer and still capable of wonder. I lived on autopilot. I lived in emotional half-light. I lived with invisible wounds, loneliness that settled like dust on an unused bookshelf, disappointment tucked beneath every smile, rejection buried so deep I pretended it was gone. But I'll come back to that. There's something you must hear before we go further, and I must say it the way it was pressed into my spirit after I returned. If parts of my old life sound like yours and you feel the urge to click away, stop. That pull to escape is proof something does not want you hearing what comes next. The invisible world reacts to truth. Always. And the pull you feel is not coincidence. Return to the fire. I continue because I must. Because this confession is not a performance, it is an obedience. Because the woman I was before my death explains why I was not ready for what appeared beside me when I crossed that boundary. Because the small fractures in my soul created the perfect entry points for what tried to claim me before the light arrived. And because you, listening now, may share more with my former self than you realize. But I'll come back to that. He called my name in the dark. And that calling began long before my heart stopped. That night began like all the others, quiet, uneventful, forgettable, one of those evenings that slips between the hours unnoticed, like a shadow passing behind the walls of routine. I remember thinking it was just another Wednesday, though the days had blurred together so completely that I could have been wrong. Exhaustion erases the calendar long before the mind admits defeat. I came home from the hospital long after the sun had fallen behind the Appalachian line. The mountains outside my window were nothing more than dark shapes kneeling under the moonlight. I loved Asheville on nights like that, the stillness, the hush, the way the air carried a faint coolness even indoors. But I was too drained to appreciate any of it. My body felt heavy with the kind of fatigue that sticks to the bones. My chest carried the invisible weight of too many unspoken words. I tossed my bag on the chair and sat at my small desk to finish sorting paperwork I had taken home, insurance forms, patient charts, signatures, numbers, the endless machinery of other people's suffering. I had promised myself that I wouldn't bring work home anymore, but promises to oneself are often the first casualties of burnout. As I spread the papers across the desk, my mind drifted back, uninvited, to the same argument that haunted me for years. The argument with the friend I never forgave. The friend whose name still stung like a splinter lodged under the skin of memory. I hadn't spoken to her in 5 years, yet she showed up in my mind almost daily, like a ghost tapping on a window no one else can hear. I replayed the argument again, every word I wished I had said, every moment I wanted to rewrite, every wound I liked to pick at because I didn't want it to heal. Forgiveness delayed becomes forgiveness denied. I didn't understand that sentence back then. Now I do. More deeply than I wish I did. I shuffled the papers, trying to focus, but the memory clung like static. A familiar bitterness rose in me, quiet, sharp, precise. I didn't want to feel it. But resentment is a loyal companion when you feed it long enough. Return to the fire. The fire of softness. The fire of mercy. The fire I had smothered without noticing. Then it happened. The stillness. A stillness so sudden, so unnatural, so complete that it felt like someone had placed a glass dome over the entire room. The sound of the refrigerator hum vanished. The cars on the distant street fell silent. Even the clock on the wall seemed to swallow its own ticking. It wasn't the gentle quiet of night, it was a suspension. A holding. A pause that did not belong to this world. At first, I thought it was my exhaustion playing tricks on me. I blinked, rubbed my temples, leaned back in my chair, but the stillness deepened instead of dissolving. It thickened, like the air had grown dense enough to touch. My skin prickled. My breath slowed without my permission. And then, I felt it. A presence. Not a figure. Not a shadow. Not a being I could see or name. But a presence that filled the corners of the room with a knowing weight. It was not threatening. But it was not comforting either. It felt like consequence. The kind that arrives long after you've forgotten what you sowed. The kind that does not shout. The kind that simply stands. My spirit sensed it before my mind understood it. My body went still, not in fear, but in recognition. It was the same sensation you feel when someone enters a room quietly and stands behind you, not touching you, but near enough that the air shifts. You know without seeing. You feel without turning. Forgiveness delayed becomes forgiveness denied. The refrain drifted through me, not in words, but an impression, like a memory spoken through water. I didn't know then that this sentence would follow me into death. That it would echo in the place where time was stripped away. That it would be one of the reasons something reached me before the light did. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The presence stayed. Silent. Unmoving. Patient. I felt watched, not by danger, but by truth. Not by accusation, but by consequence. Not by judgment, but by the mirror of everything I refused to face. Time did not stop, it was held. Held like a breath caught in the throat of eternity. Held as though the unseen world leaned closer to examine me, to weigh me, to measure the shape of my heart. I could not move. Not out of fear, but out of reverence, an involuntary reverence, the kind that overtakes you when you sense that the world you know has thinned, and something beyond it is pressing close enough to smell your thoughts. Forgiveness delayed becomes forgiveness denied. That truth circled me like a quiet storm. I wished, in that moment, that I had been softer. I wished I had been kinder. I wished I had not let resentment make a home inside my chest. But wishes are cheap. And regret always arrives too late to change the past. The presence did not speak, yet it told me everything. It stood there, not as a warning, but as a witness. A witness to my choices. A witness to my silences. A witness to the hardness I had allowed to form layer by layer. Return to the fire. I felt suddenly exposed, as though my soul had stepped forward without my body's permission. I became aware of the fractures inside me, the grudges, the bitterness, the exhaustion, the apathy, the slow erosion of compassion. I realized how far I had drifted, not in rebellion, but in neglect. And then, as quietly as it arrived, the presence withdrew, not leaving, but stepping back into an unseen place, into a dimension just beyond the thin veil of perception. The air loosened. The refrigerator hum returned. The clock ticked again. But something had shifted. I was no longer alone in the way I used to be alone. Something had seen me. Something had weighed me. Something had marked the moment. And though I didn't know it yet, that night was the first crack. The first tremor. The first warning that the boundary between this world and the next had begun to thin around me. Forgiveness delayed becomes forgiveness denied. I would understand those words soon. Too soon. And in a way I was not prepared for. He called my name in the dark. And that calling began long before my heart ever stopped. I remember the moment my body let me go. It didn't come like an alarm. It didn't roar like tragedy. It moved like a curtain in a gentle wind, quiet, soft, inevitable. A sudden stillness rose inside my chest, as if my own breathing had paused to listen to something deeper, something older than breath itself. For a brief second, I thought it was just fatigue, the natural collapse after years of running, years of pretending, years of telling myself forgiveness could wait. But the stillness grew. And then it deepened. And then it hollowed me out with a peace I wasn't ready to understand. I felt my knees buckle, not in fear, but in surrender. One moment I was standing in my living room, surrounded by the debris of unpaid bills and unfinished thoughts. The next moment, I felt myself fold gently, the way pages of an old book fall closed when left unattended. There was no violence. No pain. Just release, like an exhale that had waited my entire life to be set free. I heard nothing except my own silence. I saw nothing except the soft blur of the world dimming around the edges. It was as though my body exhaled me. As though it knew the weight of holding me had grown too heavy, and it finally loosened its grip. And suddenly, color softened. Shadows lengthened. The air itself grew tender, almost merciful. I didn't fight it. I didn't even think to. For the first time in years, my mind was not a swarm of old arguments, delayed apologies, or imaginary battles I fought with people who weren't even in the room. Everything was quiet, profoundly quiet, beautifully quiet. I floated upward. Not like a balloon. Not like a dream. More like a memory rising back to where it belonged. My body was below me, still, small, almost folded like a prayer someone forgot to finish. But there was no fear in seeing it. Only clarity. As if I had finally stepped outside the noise of being human and could finally see what had been whispering behind every moment of my life. Return to the fire. The refrain brushed across my awareness like a warm wind, soft but insistent, ancient but familiar. Return to the fire. I didn't know what the fire was. But I knew it had always been calling me. Everything around me felt expanded, suspended, held. Held the way a mother holds a fragile memory. Held the way light holds dust in a quiet morning room. I felt weightless and seen, emptied yet overflowing. Drifting upward, I noticed how my thoughts no longer formed in words but in impressions, currents, revelations. I wasn't thinking about things, I was simply knowing them. A lifetime of bitterness, exhaustion, and delayed forgiveness started peeling away from me like old skin I had never needed. I realized how much of my life had been lived clenched. Clenched in resentment. Clenched in fear. Clenched in the belief that tomorrow would always be there for healing. But here, rising above myself, I understood the truth. Forgiveness delayed becomes forgiveness denied. And I felt the sting of that realization, not harsh, but honest. Not condemning, but clarifying. As I ascended into a softness that felt like dawn turned liquid, I wondered briefly if this was a dream. But dreams are fragile and inconsistent. This was absolute. This was the version of reality that had been hiding behind the veil the whole time. I moved through the room without touching anything, without disturbing a single thread of the world I once clung to. It was humbling, almost heartbreaking, to see how small everything looked from this new vantage point. All those anxieties. All that hurried scrolling. All that heavy loneliness. All those unspoken apologies sealed inside the quiet chambers of my chest. None of it followed me. None of it mattered here. Not in this space where everything false evaporated. The room below faded into a soft haze, as if memory itself were gently closing its eyes. And then, a subtle warmth pressed around me. Not a figure. Not yet. Just presence, full, attentive, holy. A presence that felt like consequence and love woven into one. A presence that felt like the answer to every question I never had the courage to ask. He called my name in the dark. The refrain trembled through the air around me, though no lips spoke it. He called my name in the dark. The upward pull strengthened, gentle but unyielding, like the tide insisting the shore release what it never truly owned. I let myself be carried. I let myself be unmade. I let myself be seen. And as the world dissolved behind me, I felt another truth settle into my being like a solemn vow. My life had ended quietly. But the story, the message, the warning, was only beginning. Because something waited above the veil. Something that had watched my life with both sorrow and patience. Something that had stepped closer the moment my heart stilled. Something that had been standing beside me long before I died. And what it was. Why it came. What it showed me. I would have to tell you. I promised heaven I would. But I'll come back to that. Return to the fire. The refrain echoed again, leading me upward. And I followed. I rose higher, drifting into a realm where everything felt washed in a soft, luminous hush. But then, like a gentle tug on a thread I didn't know was attached to me, I was drawn downward for a moment. Not back into my body, but back toward the echoes of the world I had just left. The room below me sharpened again, not in form but in feeling. And then I sensed movement, hurried, trembling movement. A familiar presence rushed into the space where my body lay folded on the floor. I couldn't see their face clearly, I saw only the shape of their anguish, the silhouette of someone I had loved imperfectly and taken for granted. They knelt beside my still body, and though I heard nothing with my ears, I felt their grief as if it were traveling through water, muffled, distant, yet unmistakably heavy. Their sorrow vibrated through the space like a slow, aching tremor. And I realized. I had carried my unforgiveness so tightly that I never realized how it had wounded the ones who tried to love me. What we refuse to forgive becomes our unfinished business. The refrain pulsed through me, soft but cutting, like a truth spoken too late. I watched them shake, touched by the kind of sorrow that comes from words unsaid, from apologies postponed, from bridges left broken too long. I saw the guilt rising inside them, though none of this was their fault. It was mine, all the ways I hardened, all the walls I built, all the moments I let pride win when love was begging for one more chance. Then other shapes entered the room, rescuers, moving with a kind of sacred urgency. EMTs. Professionals who had seen this scene countless times, yet never without the whisper of humanity trailing behind their movements. To me, their presence felt like ripples against the veil, gentle disturbances in a world I was no longer anchored to. They moved around my body with purposeful hands and practiced focus, but their voices reached me only as soft vibrations, filtered and distant, as if I were listening from beneath a deep lake. Their words didn't form, they simply floated, incomplete and blurred. But the intention behind them, care, duty, concern, pressed through. I tried to speak. Or maybe I only tried to think the shape of words. Either way, nothing crossed the divide. I felt the ache of that, this sudden helplessness, this inability to touch the living world even when it trembled right beneath me. My thoughts poured toward them like light, but the veil held firm. They could not hear me. And I could not bridge what I had broken. What we refuse to forgive becomes our unfinished business. The refrain returned, quieter this time, but heavier. As they lifted my body, as they worked to pull breath back into lungs that no longer held me, I saw something with a clarity I never had while alive. Every resentment I clung to had carved little distances between me and the people who loved me. Tiny fractures. Small separations. Paper-thin walls that eventually hardened to stone. And now, watching their fear, their desperation, their unspoken guilt, I felt the full weight of my postponements. I had always assumed I would have time. Time to soften. Time to apologize. Time to mend what had been quietly bleeding. But here, above the edge of my old life, I saw the truth. Time is not a guarantee, it is a loan. Their hands worked on my body. Their hearts spilled over it. Their grief wove itself into the air. And I hovered, unable to touch a single thread of it. The scene blurred again, as though the veil itself were urging me forward, reminding me that my journey was not behind me, but ahead, into the light I had begun rising toward. Yet before I fully ascended, one final realization pierced me. The hurt I never forgave had become the hurt I never healed. And that wound, left unattended, had echoed into the lives of those who loved me, fracturing them in ways I never saw while busy guarding my pride. What we refuse to forgive becomes our unfinished business. The refrain settled deep within me, stinging yet sacred. And as the rescuers continued their work, as my loved ones trembled beside my still form, I understood with trembling clarity. I was leaving behind more than a body. I was leaving behind a legacy of postponed mercy. And heaven would show me what that meant. Soon. Very soon. I felt the upward pull again, gentle, firm, unavoidable. The veil loosened its grip on the sound of earthly grief. Light drew nearer. Presence gathered. Purpose beckoned. But I'll come back to that. The upward pull deepened, and the room below me thinned into a dim watercolor, its edges softening, its sounds dissolving, its grief unraveling into something weightless. I felt myself surrendering to it, not with resistance, but with a strange, aching acceptance. The world I had known was loosening its grip on me like a hand releasing another in slow motion. And then, it was gone. Not torn away. Not ripped. Just quietly lifted, as gently as a curtain being raised before a stage no human eyes were meant to see. The physical world faded behind me, thinning until it became a faint, distant shimmer, like the memory of a dream upon waking. And as that curtain rose, I slipped into a depth of darkness so warm, so alive, that for a moment I wondered if darkness itself could breathe. It wasn't emptiness. It wasn't fear. It was presence, thick, soft, vast. A darkness that held rather than swallowed. I drifted in it, suspended, as if the air itself had hands. There was no weight on me, no gravity, no urgency. Only a deep, humming quiet that felt almost sacred, like the pause between heartbeats or the moment before a revelation. He called my name in the dark. The refrain shimmered through me, not in sound but in knowing. A memory of something ancient, something familiar, something I had forgotten long before this life began. He called my name in the dark. I felt myself opening to it, letting it echo through me, letting it shape the stillness inside me. And as I floated, I became aware that I was not alone. Memories began to gather around me, at first as faint glimmers, then as soft drifting shapes. They didn't play like a movie. They unfolded like floating fragments, each one glowing with a dim, reflective light. There was the memory of my childhood bedroom, the window cracked open, the smell of rain drifting inside, my small hands clutching a blanket as I cried silently into the night, believing no one saw me. There was the grocery store parking lot where I held on to bitterness like a secret comfort after that argument I refused to resolve. There were the dry, tired mornings when I scrolled through my phone for validation, knowing it numbed me more than it healed me. They drifted like underwater lanterns, soft, slow, weightless. And among them, threading through the glow, I sensed something else. A presence. The same presence that had entered my living room earlier, in those minutes before my breath went still. It wasn't shaped like any being I had ever known. No form. No outline. No eyes watching from the shadows. Instead, it was a fog. A symbolic fog, thick and gray and strangely patient. It curled gently through the warm darkness, neither chasing nor retreating. Its movement was smooth, almost tender, as if it carried sorrow rather than threat. I felt myself studying it, not with eyes, but with some deeper sense that belonged more to the soul than to the body I had left behind. This fog, it wasn't evil. It wasn't malicious. It didn't reach for me, it didn't hunger, it didn't speak. It simply existed, soft, hovering, close enough to notice yet distant enough not to touch. He called my name in the dark. The refrain pulsed again, and the fog reacted, not recoiling, not advancing, but trembling faintly, as though the sound of that call stirred something within it. Only slowly did I begin recognizing the resonance it carried. The fog felt familiar. Not as a face, not as a spirit, but as a weight, an emotional residue that I had lived with so long I no longer recognized it as foreign. Unhealed tension. Emotional decay. The sediment of forgiveness delayed too many times. The fog seemed made of every strained silence, every withheld apology, every lingering grudge that never received its burial. It was the shape of the wounds I never tended, the same wounds that had shaped the emotional barriers between me and the people I loved. There was the grocery store parking lot where I held on to bitterness like a secret comfort after that argument I refused to resolve. There were the dry, tired mornings when I scrolled through my phone for validation, knowing it numbed me more than it healed me. They drifted like underwater lanterns, soft, slow, weightless. And among them, threading through the glow, I sensed something else. A presence. The same presence that had entered my living room earlier, in those minutes before my breath went still. It wasn't shaped like any being I had ever known. No form. No outline. No eyes watching from the shadows. Instead, it was a fog. A symbolic fog, thick and gray and strangely patient. It curled gently through the warm darkness, neither chasing nor retreating. Its movement was smooth, almost tender, as if it carried sorrow rather than threat. I felt myself studying it, not with eyes, but with some deeper sense that belonged more to the soul than to the body I had left behind. This fog, it wasn't evil. It wasn't malicious. It didn't reach for me, it didn't hunger, it didn't speak. It simply existed, soft, hovering, close enough to notice yet distant enough not to touch. He called my name in the dark. The refrain pulsed again, and the fog reacted, not recoiling, not advancing, but trembling faintly, as though the sound of that call stirred something within it. Only slowly did I begin recognizing the resonance it carried. The fog felt familiar. Not as a face, not as a spirit, but as a weight, an emotional residue that I had lived with so long I no longer recognized it as foreign. Unhealed tension. Emotional decay. The sediment of forgiveness delayed too many times. The fog seemed made of every strained silence, every withheld apology, every lingering grudge that never received its burial. It was the shape of the wounds I never tended, the same wounds that had shaped the emotional barriers between me and the people I loved. It represented souls like mine, souls who had postponed softness until softness had hardened into armor. Souls who believed they had time. Souls who thought forgiveness could wait. It didn't attack, it didn't suffocate, it didn't pull. It numbed. It was as if the fog carried a quiet invitation to settle into apathy, to drift among memories without truly facing them. To float without growing. To surrender without waking. I felt a subtle coolness brushing across me, a sensation not of cold but of neutrality, like the absence of warmth, the pause between emotions. An invitation to be still forever, without the pain of confrontation or the risk of change. For a moment, I almost yielded. There was something tempting about it, the ease, the quietness, the relief from striving. But then the refrain rose again, not from outside but from deep within. He called my name in the dark. The moment it sounded in me, the fog trembled again. It wasn't frightened. It wasn't wounded. It simply recognized a boundary it could not cross, a call it could not overshadow. I didn't yet understand what it was. Why it had hovered in my living room before I collapsed. Why it had followed me into this warm darkness. Why it lingered here, patient and silent. I didn't know yet. But I would. Jesus would reveal its meaning later. As I drifted further from the world and deeper into the living dark, I felt something shift. A current stirred beneath me, not physical, not forceful, but inevitable. It carried me forward as gently as a river carries fallen leaves. The darkness around me brightened, not with light, but with awareness, as though the very fabric of this place was waking up to my arrival. And then the memories around me began to dissolve, one by one, like breath fading from glass. The fog loosened its shape, thinning, retreating into the edges of the unseen, waiting for its moment to be revealed. The warmth deepened. Presence grew. And the call. The call rose again. He called my name in the dark. And this time I realized. Where the world had ended, the unveiling had only begun. If you've ever wondered what waits after your last breath, don't scroll away now. If you leave, you'll carry that unanswered question into eternity. A warmth rises behind me. Not sudden. Not violent. Not demanding. Just rising. As if an ancient dawn remembers its duty and begins to climb the horizon of my unmade form. I do not turn at first. I only feel it, like the first touch of summer on frozen skin, like breath returning to lungs that had forgotten the rhythm of living. The darkness around me loosens. It loosens the way grief loosens when truth enters the room. It loosens the way chains loosen when the one who forged the metal finally comes to break it. I feel the shadows bend. I feel them bow. I feel them surrender. Not to me, never to me. But to the one approaching behind me. And in the soft unraveling silence, something ancient within me whispers the refrain that has followed me since the veil tore open. Every soul knows the light that made it. I have no body here, yet I feel my entire being tremble. Not with fear. With recognition. The warmth deepens. It settles into the marrow of my essence. It gathers me, like a mother gathering a child who wandered too close to the edge of the world. Colors begin to ripple through the dissolving dark. Not colors the human eye has known. These are living colors. Breathing colors. Colors that sing. They bloom like revelation. They crest like waves of truth brushing against the shore of a wounded spirit. And in the midst of them, I feel a hum. It vibrates through me. Through whatever I am now. Like someone striking a tuning fork made of eternity and placing it against the center of my soul. I feel myself resonate. I feel myself align. I feel something inside me remember. Because that hum. I have heard it before. Not in sound, but in design. It is the frequency my soul was written in. The signature tone of the one who imagined me before time began its slow, stubborn march. The colors grow brighter. The warmth grows nearer. The hum deepens until it becomes atmosphere itself. Something shifts. Like a door opening without hinges. Like a dawn rising without sun. Like a presence stepping forward without steps. And then, the light enters. Not blinding. Not scorching. Not the kind of light that overwhelms vision. This light does not conquer, it reveals. It does not invade, it invites. It does not demand, it simply is. And because it simply is, everything else that is not it begins to fall away. My fear. My excuses. My illusions of control. My small, frantic attempts to define the universe through the narrow lens of survival. They crumble silently. They drift like dust caught in a beam of morning sunlight. The light moves closer. It is not just illumination, it is consciousness. Awareness. Personhood without form. Presence without boundary. And though I see no face, no figure, no features, I know, instantly, instinctively, undeniably, that it is him. I do not ask how. The question itself feels absurd in this place. Recognition here is not learned. It is remembered. Every soul knows the light that made it. The refrain rises inside me again, but this time it does not feel like a whisper. It feels like a truth that has always been stitched into me. A truth I had buried under noise and ambition and pride and distraction. Here, in this holy nearness, I cannot pretend ignorance. I cannot pretend independence. I cannot pretend I authored myself. He is here. And his presence announces itself without words. It is not a declaration. It is an unveiling. His presence is weight and tenderness at once. It is the gravity of love. It is the architecture of mercy. It is the warmth of 1,000 mornings I never deserved. I feel myself turning toward him. Not with limbs, but with essence. As if the core of who I am is pulled by the very one who shaped it. The light swells. Not outward. But inward. It stretches into the places inside me where childhood disappointments still tremble. Where unspoken regrets still bleed. Where secret fears still hide under the blankets of my self-deception. He sees all of it. Not by looking. But by being. And in his nearness, I feel layers of myself peeling away. Like old skin. Like old lies. Like old versions of me that never belonged to the truth. I feel exposed and held. Unmade and restored. Undone and completed. A paradox only divine love can sustain. The light is all around me now. Above, behind, within, before. It is not a thing to be reached, it is a presence that reaches. It finds me. It fills me. It calls me by the name he wrote, not the one I broke. And inside that radiant quiet, the refrain returns. Not as a thought. Not as a memory. But as a revelation embroidered into the fabric of my being. Every soul knows the light that made it. The words echo through me like a ceremony. Like a vow being renewed. Like an identity being restored. Here, wrapped in his approach, I understand something I had forgotten. Nothing in the darkness had pursued me. Nothing in the darkness had claimed me. I had walked into it myself. But the light came for me anyway. The light always comes. The light never forgets. The light remembers every soul by name. He draws closer still. And the warmth becomes a presence. The presence becomes a touch. The touch becomes a knowing. And the knowing becomes a trembling ache in the deepest part of me. The ache of being seen completely. And loved completely. In the same breath. I feel like falling. I feel like rising. I feel like dissolving into his remembrance. And as he stands. Not before me. Not above me. But around me. The last veil of darkness evaporates from the edges of eternity. I know what is coming next. I do not know because I am wise. I know because I belong. Because in the radiance of his nearness, the truth becomes unavoidable. Every soul knows the light that made it. And I, finally, am remembering mine. And then the light gathers itself. Not brighter. But nearer. Near in the way a truth becomes near. Pressing against the edges of a soul that can no longer run from what it always knew. I feel the presence shift. I feel him take a form, not because he must, but because I must. Because my fragile, earthly mind could not behold him as he truly is. The light condenses. It bends inward like a star remembering its center. It softens into shape. Not the shape of limitation. But the shape of mercy. A form appears before me, carved not from matter. But from meaning. A form my humanity can bear without collapsing in awe. And in that holy nearness. In that sacred unveiling. I feel him. Jesus. As he chooses to be known in this moment. He stands before me the way a flame stands before a moth torn by cold. Gentle. Steady. Certain. Overflowing with a quiet authority that does not shout to be obeyed. I do not see a face in the way the earth defines faces. Yet I know expression. I do not see eyes in the way the earth paints eyes. Yet I feel gaze. I do not hear a voice in the way sound travels. Yet I receive meaning as though language itself bows to him. And then it happens. The moment the universe itself seems to inhale. When he turns the fullness of his attention toward me. And speaks my name into the core of my being. Grace. Not spoken aloud. Spoken within. Spoken into the root of who I am. Spoken with the tenderness of someone who remembers the first time my soul trembled in his thoughts. Grace. My name becomes a revelation. My name becomes a recognition. My name becomes a reminder that I am known, utterly, completely, terrifyingly, lovingly known. Known beyond memory. Known beyond failure. Known beyond excuses. Known beyond the masks I stitched together just to feel safe in a world that never understood me. He calls my name in the dark. And the dark inside me cannot withstand it. He called my name in the dark. The refrain echoes like a vow I did not know I once made. It swells through the hollow places of my spirit, filling them with something that feels like both fire and peace. And in his presence, I understand something the earth never taught me. Being known is not exposure. Being known is home. I feel naked, but not shamed. Visible, but not judged. Laid open, but not abandoned. Seen, but not condemned. I feel held in a way I never knew holding could exist. And then the encounter deepens. Not outward. Inward. Like a curtain gently opening inside the heart. He reveals my life to me. Not as scenes. Not as memories. Not as a sequence of failures and successes. He shows it to me as meanings. As threads. As patterns. As spiritual consequences shaped by spiritual choices. He reveals the architecture of my soul. Not what I did. But why. Not what unfolded. But what it shaped in me. He shows me why I numbed my heart. I see the quiet moments I hid from myself. Seasons when sorrow felt too heavy to carry. So I buried it in distractions. In noise. In endlessly scrolling through the empty things that only deepened the ache. He shows me how I turned my face away from pain. Thinking avoidance would save me. Not knowing that numbness is not healing. It is slow dying. I watch myself reaching for small comforts. When what I needed was holy surgery. I see how I kept choosing the temporary anesthesia of earthly pleasures, instead of the eternal medicine of divine truth. He called my name in the dark. The refrain stirs again, reminding me that even in my numbness, he had been near. Then he shows me why my distractions mattered. They seemed harmless. They seemed minor. But in his presence, I see what they truly were. Tiny threads pulling me away from my own soul. Every hour lost in mindless wandering. Every moment spent chasing hollow stimulation. Every convenience I used to drown the whisper of conviction. Each one shaped me. Not the acts themselves, but their effect. They trained my heart to flee stillness. They conditioned me to fear silence. They taught me to avoid the very spaces where his voice could reach me. And then he shows me something heavier. Something I had avoided even in death. He shows me why unforgiveness is spiritually dangerous. Not because it breaks rules, but because it breaks souls. Slowly. Quietly. Deeply. He reveals the symbolic fog I had wandered through. Not fog of the world. Fog of me. And I understand. The fog was the spiritual weight of delayed forgiveness. It was the heaviness of wounds I refused to release. It was the shadowy mist that formed when my heart said, I will never forget. And my spirit whispered, then you will never heal. I see how the fog grew thicker each time I rehearsed old pain. Each time I replayed betrayals in my mind. Each time I held someone's wrongdoing like a shield against vulnerability. Every withheld release became a seed. And every seed of bitterness grew roots that strangled the parts of me that were meant to breathe. And then I see something that breaks me more than my own story. Millions carry the same fog. Millions walk through life unable to see clearly. Because their hearts remain tethered to wounds they refuse to surrender. The fog is everywhere. Not as punishment, but as consequence. He reveals it to me gently. But truly. As only the light can reveal truth without crushing the soul that must bear it. He called my name in the dark. And now he calls me out of the fog. Then he shows me how delaying forgiveness changes the soul. Not instantly. Not violently. But subtly. Like corrosion on metal. Like mold on forgotten bread. Like rust on a once gleaming blade. Delayed forgiveness shifts the posture of the heart. It makes compassion feel burdensome. It makes empathy feel costly. It makes tenderness feel dangerous. I see relationships I froze in bitterness. People I held at arm's length. Not because they were dangerous, but because I didn't know how to let the pain thaw. I see how spiritual numbness spreads. From one memory. To one habit. To one identity. Until suddenly, the soul becomes a house with no open doors. A house where nothing enters and nothing escapes. Then, in a way beyond human speech, he communicates a message. The message my entire life had been circling around without ever grasping. The message that cuts through the fog. Through the wounds. Through the memories. Through the excuses I had used to justify my stiffness of heart. Forgiveness is not about them. It is the key to free you. The truth enters me like a wind. Like a fire. Like a revelation that knows its way through bone and marrow. Forgiveness was never an endorsement of the hurt. It was never absolution of the other person. It was never a declaration that the wrongdoing was acceptable. Forgiveness was freedom. Forgiveness was oxygen. Forgiveness was worship. Forgiveness was the unlocking of the prison I had built for myself while believing I was punishing someone else. He called my name in the dark. And now he calls my chains by name too. So they can break. As he reveals these truths, he does not accuse. He does not shame. He does not condemn. His presence holds me even as his truth remakes me. He stands before me as light. Yet I feel held as though by hands more gentle than any earth ever knew. And as this divine encounter reaches deeper, as the truth ripples through every memory, every wound, every hidden corner of my heart, I feel something loosen. Something soften. Something awaken. I feel the first stirring of a freedom I did not know I had forfeited. And now I must speak directly to you. Not to preach. Not to frighten. But because he showed me this truth so that I would never bury it again. If there is even one person you refuse to forgive, and your spirit feels heavy hearing this, that heaviness is mercy warning you. Mercy does not always whisper gently. Sometimes mercy weighs on the heart. So the heart will finally look at what it has tried to ignore. The fog does not lift on its own. It lifts when forgiveness is released. And I was seeing, in this holy encounter, the truth that nearly cost me my soul. Forgiveness is the door back to breath. Forgiveness is the gate back to light. Forgiveness is the way the soul returns to itself. And the one who called my name in the dark was now calling me. And calling you. Back into the freedom we were meant to carry. He moved nothing in front of me. Yet everything changed. One moment I was standing within that living brightness, my soul opened, my hidden places revealed, my past understood in ways I had never dared confront, and the next, something shifted around me. Not outwardly. Inwardly. As though a gentle but omniscient hand tilted the axis of my awareness and said without speaking, "Look." And so I looked. I had no eyes there, not as we imagine them on earth, but I saw. I saw with understanding, with recognition, with the strange, haunting clarity of a soul unchained from distraction. What opened before me was not a movie, not a timeline, not even a memory. It was something deeper, like the veil between spirit and meaning was pulled back, and I was allowed to witness not events but the truth beneath them. I felt myself rising, not up, but deeper. Deeper into something vast, unfolding, trembling with a sorrow older than nations. And then it came. A vision. A panorama. A spiritual landscape stretched across existence like a map of collective ache. And in that vision I beheld my generation. America first appeared, not by borders, not by flags, not by skylines, but by the sound of its restlessness. It was a hum. A static. A constant thrum of attention pulled, stretched, addicted. It was as though the country breathed through 1,000 screens at once. A restless breathing. A shallow one. Like a nation inhaling dust. I watched as the hum thickened into noise. Noise that wrapped itself around hearts like a tightening fabric. Noise that shielded people from the quiet places where truth usually whispers. Noise that drowned the gentle pull toward forgiveness, humility, surrender. Noise that replaced stillness with scrolling. 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 Endless movement while the inner life starved. From where I stood in that holy brightness, I could see their faces, not individually, but collectively, like a mosaic of souls moving through their days. Their hands held phones like lifelines. Their eyes flickered with moments of longing disguised as boredom. Their hearts beat beneath layers of numbing habits. And the pain, oh, the pain, rose from them like steam. Loneliness sealed beneath bravado. Fear buried beneath productivity. Unforgiveness disguised as self-protection. I saw people clutching grudges not as wounds, but as proof of their own righteousness, proof of their own injury, proof that they were owed something they never received. They held these grudges the way warriors grip shields, believing the hardness made them strong. But from where I stood, I saw it differently. I saw each grudge as a small, glowing ember of bitterness, burning quietly inside their ribs. Each one dimmed the eyes just a little. Each one dragged the soul just slightly downward. Each one, over time, built invisible walls around the heart, walls so sturdy that even mercy had to knock twice. I saw forgiveness postponed until someday. But someday never arrived. Someday calcified into never. And that refrain that had haunted me earlier rose again in my mind like a bell tolling across a wide valley. Forgiveness delayed becomes forgiveness denied. The vision deepened. I saw families, rooms filled with silent tension, people passing one another like ghosts in their own homes. A mother scrolling to numb her exhaustion. A father replaying old wounds he never dared speak aloud. Children growing up in houses full of words, yet starved of apologies. I saw siblings who hadn't spoken in years, simply because pride felt safer than vulnerability. I saw friendships dissolving not because of betrayal, but because no one wanted to send the first honest message. I saw marriages that became cold not overnight, but degree by degree, like water warming slowly until the boil is inescapable. And then I saw myself. Not the earthly me lying on a floor back in Asheville. Not the version of me gasping in an ambulance. But the spiritual truth of who I had been. A woman who waited. A woman who delayed. A woman who convinced herself that time would heal what only humility could. A woman who believed forgiveness could wait, because she was tired or overwhelmed or entitled to her anger. And in that moment, the shame stung. Not the shame that crushes, but the shame that awakens. Because from this higher vantage point, I finally understood the danger of postponing what the heart was designed to release. And then the vision widened again. I saw America drowning, not in water, but in avoidance. People choked not for lack of air, but lack of stillness. Hearts suffocated beneath layers of unresolved tension. Souls gasped beneath burdens they mistook for personality. The fog I had encountered earlier drifted across the landscape like a quiet epidemic. Not evil. Not monstrous. But deadly in its slowness. A fog formed from millions of unspoken apologies. Millions of withheld mercies. Millions of postponed reconciliations. Millions of hearts that chose numbness over risk. It swirled over cities and suburbs, over offices and churches, over bedrooms lit only by phone screens at 2 a.m. It wrapped around people's ankles, then their ribs, then their throats. Not choking, no. That would be too noticeable. Instead, it sedated. That was the danger. The sedation of the soul. And inside that sedation lived something quieter but far more destructive. A spiritual blindness. In the vision, I saw how resentment dimmed the inner sight, the sight that recognizes meaning, the sight that hears direction, the sight that senses the soul's true hunger. People weren't becoming hard because they wanted to. They were becoming hard because forgiveness was always something they planned to do later. Tomorrow. Next week. When they calmed down. When the other person apologized first. When life settled. When they felt ready. But bitterness ages the heart faster than time. And many never reached ready. Then the vision narrowed again, focusing like a lens drawing tight. I felt myself held by a grief that was not mine alone. A grief that came from understanding, from seeing what humanity refuses to face until the final breath strips away the excuses. That forgiveness is not about the other person. Forgiveness is the release of the chains you wrapped around your own spirit. I inhaled that truth like a sob I had been holding for years. I felt the weight of a generation suffering from emotional frostbite. I felt the urgency of the message burning through me. And I felt the unspoken command, not as words, but as calling. You must return with this. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a burden placed on my soul like a seal. Because this vision wasn't just information. It was assignment. I understood with chilling clarity that I had been shown the cost of delay, not as punishment, but as warning. A warning for me. A warning for you. A warning for anyone breathing today who believes their bitterness is harmless. In that moment, a tremor of obedience moved through me, and I whispered inside myself. He called my name in the dark. He called my name so I would call yours. And the words rose in me with a force I could not resist, an inner knowing forged from witnessing the ruins of souls I recognized, patterns I lived, excuses I cherished. Tell them that postponing forgiveness builds walls that follow them beyond the grave. Not a threat. A truth. A truth I saw with my own unmasked soul. Then the vision slowly dimmed, not fading, but folding itself like a sacred parchment tucked back into a divine archive. And I stood there, trembling in the softness of that holy brightness, carrying a message I did not want but could not deny. And now, I carry it to you. And if your heart tightens hearing this, if your spirit shifts uncomfortably, if you feel the impulse to click away and escape this moment, listen to me gently, as someone who learned too late. If you keep waiting for the right moment to forgive, ask yourself, who is benefiting from your delay? Heaven, or your pride? I say that not to shame you, but because I once believed I had endless tomorrows. I didn't. You may not either. But I'll come back to that. I remember the moment the vision dimmed, not fading, but folding, like a curtain pulled gently by unseen hands. I felt the ache before I understood it. A quiet, primal ache, the kind that settles in the soul rather than the body. The kind that whispers, asterisk, you are about to lose the place you did not know you longed for. Asterisk. And in that ache, I felt a tremor of desperation. A trembling desire to stay. To remain in the warmth, the clarity, the unfiltered truth of the realm where nothing hides, nothing lies, nothing breaks. I felt myself reaching, not with hands, but with the longing of my being, as if I could anchor myself to the light that had revealed me, remade me, undone me with mercy I had never earned. But he stood before me in a stillness that felt like eternity holding its breath. And in that stillness, I felt his intent before I perceived its meaning. I was not meant to remain. Not yet. A sorrow rose in me, thick as incense, and I felt the confession forming without words. I do not want to return, not to the noise, not to the numbness, not to the unfinished mess of my earthly heart. But the truth washed over me like a tide. I was not being asked what I wanted. I was being shown what I was needed for. He called my name in the dark. The refrain rose again, echoing through my spirit like a bell struck in the deep. I felt the weight of purpose descend, not crushing, but commissioning. A mantle, not a burden. A vow, not a punishment. And then, a strange, holy unveiling. I saw faces. Hundreds at first. Then thousands. Then more than I could count. They were not from the past. They were not from the life I had lived. They were from the future. From the very moments when others would hear this testimony, when hearts would listen, when souls numbed by distraction would suddenly feel their own pulse again. I saw them watching. Some with eyes glassy from exhaustion. Some half listening, pretending not to be desperate. Some trembling because something inside them recognized truth before their minds did. I saw young men who had forgotten how to feel. Women carrying decades of resentment like armor welded to their ribs. Parents haunted by apologies they never voiced. Children who grew into adults still frozen in the wounds of their youth. And beneath each face, a faint glow pulsed. Not warm, not strong, but present. A remnant. A spark. A small ember that had never fully died, even when they were convinced they had extinguished it themselves. I understood, then. My testimony was not a story. It was a summons. A quiet trumpet in the night. A call whispered into the marrow of those who no longer recognized their own souls. The revelation tightened around me like a sacred vow. Your voice is needed because too many hearts have become strangers to themselves. I felt something like a gentle pressure against my spirit. A nudge, a sending, a release. Not a dismissal. But a mission. Return, before your heart becomes unrecognizable to you. The refrain rose again, solemn and sorrowful. I felt it imprint on me, permanent and inescapable. A warning not only for me, but for every soul who would someday hear this, the viewers whose faces I had just seen suspended in that holy panorama. The words carried a weight that felt ancient, like they had been spoken to generations long before mine, and would be spoken again to those yet to be born. I understood. He was sending me back not because the world was gentle, but because it was bleeding. Not because my voice was polished, but because it was cracked in the right places. Not because I had lived well, but because I had lived blind. And blindness healed becomes a lantern. I felt the pull begin. The slow unraveling of my spirit from the realm of clarity. The thinning of that sacred atmosphere. The dissolution of the vision. A part of me wanted to resist. To cling. To plead for one more moment in the warmth that had remade me. But obedience rose stronger. And with that obedience came understanding. The testimony was not mine to hoard. It was mine to release. Because somewhere, someone would hear these words on the exact day their heart was about to harden beyond recognition. Somewhere, another soul would be seconds away from surrendering to numbness, and this story would be the hand pulling them back. Somewhere, a weary heart would understand for the first time that forgiveness was not a concession, but a rescue. And somewhere, someone would finally ask themselves the question they had avoided for years. Asterisk, what has my heart become? Asterisk. The vision of the viewers, of you, glowed one last time. Not bright, not brilliant, but steady. Steady enough to guide me back. I felt the realm behind me seal like a door gently closing. Not as punishment, but as promise. I was being sent to tell this generation what I had seen. What I had learned. What had been etched onto the deepest layers of my being. And so I yielded to the pull. I let myself fall, not down, but through. Through silence. Through distance. Through memory. And as the light dissolved around me, one last refrain echoed with the force of prophecy. Return, before your heart becomes unrecognizable to you. It followed me into the dark. It follows me still. And now, it follows you. The descent began quietly, so quietly I almost didn't notice it at first. It was not a fall, not a collapse, not even a motion. It was more like the slow, mournful closing of a book whose final page had already been written. The light that had held me, shaped me, unmade me, and remade me, began to withdraw. Not sharply, not cruelly, but with a gentleness that carried the ache of farewell. I felt it peeling away from me in delicate layers, like warmth retreating from the surface of the soul. And with every inch that dimmed, I felt the world below me stirring again, the world of gravity, of noise, of breath and bone and unfinished stories. Somewhere in the fading brilliance, the refrain pulsed one last time like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. He called my name in the dark. And as its echo dissolved, the falling began. It was not the falling of terror. It was the falling of assignment. A return, not a punishment. A mission, not a mistake. I felt myself slipping downward through an unseen chasm of silence. The brightness thinned into shadow, the shadow thinned into memory, and memory thinned into weight. The weight of the body I had left behind. Then came the sensation, swift and harsh, of being poured back into myself. The first thing I felt was the boundary of flesh, a boundary I had forgotten. It tightened around me like a garment 2 sizes too small. The second thing was heaviness. A dense, earthly heaviness that clung to every inch of my being. And the third? The third was breath. It tore through me like a storm returning to a long-abandoned coast. A violent reclaiming. A gasp that felt like both birth and rupture. My lungs expanded with needles of air that felt foreign, too sharp, almost hostile after the purity I had known. My chest convulsed. My ribs shuddered. My body remembered its fragility instantly. I opened my eyes into the dim hospital room. Machines hummed like distant, indifferent insects. Shadows clung to the corners. The air was thick with the sterile scent of earth, so different from the clarity I had known beyond it. Shapes moved. There were bodies near me, stunned, trembling, overwhelmed. Their faces dissolved at the edges like watercolor touched by rain. I recognized them and yet did not reach for them. Recognition felt too small compared to the vastness I had just left. My heart was beating. But it beat with a different rhythm now. A rhythm braided with memory, warning, mercy. As awareness settled, the first impulse that rose in me was not fear. It was not confusion. It was not even wonder. It was forgiveness. It surged through me like a flood breaking every dam I had ever built. A quiet, unstoppable release. Not aimed at one person or one wound. Not confined to any particular season of my life. It was as if the realm I had come from had poured its final instruction into me on the way down. Forgive. Forgive now. Forgive all. Before my mind could form a coherent thought, my lips moved. The words did not feel like mine. They felt older, heavier, truer, like something placed inside me by the one who had shown me what withholding had done to my soul. I felt the whisper leave me, not forced, not rehearsed, not chosen. A quiet surrender. A letting go. A release of names, memories, disappointments, and hidden resentments I had carried for years like quiet poisons. Forgiveness flowed out of me without aim, without resistance, without condition. It was not directed toward one face or one wound. It was a sweeping exhale, a cleansing, a relinquishing of all the bitterness I had ever hoarded. And as the whisper faded into the sterile air of the hospital room, I felt a strange warmth settle into my chest, faint but steady, like the final ember of a fire that refuses to die. In that moment, still trembling between two worlds, still half conscious in the fragile architecture of my body, I understood. I had returned changed. Marked. Rewritten. Pulled back into flesh with a mission burning beneath my ribs. I lay there, breathing painfully, seeing dimly, feeling everything through a veil of heaviness, but inside me, something remained unextinguished. A memory of the light. A vow woven into my spirit. A refrain that would follow me into every hour of my life from that moment on. Return to the fire. And even as machines beeped around me, and earthly air filled my lungs, I knew. My life was no longer my own. I speak now because the weight inside me will not allow silence. I speak because something in you, yes, you, has been stirring since the moment this story reached your eyes. I cannot pretend I don't feel it. And I will not pretend you don't feel it either. There is a reason your breath shifted, even slightly. There is a reason your heartbeat changed pace. I do not claim to know the mysteries of heaven, but I know the gravity of timing, and this moment has the unmistakable pull of one. He called my name in the dark. And now something inside you remembers that same darkness, and that same calling. I don't believe you stumbled upon this. I don't believe your hands moved without the pressure of something deeper, something older than your distractions, older than your routine, older than your defenses. I do not need to claim divine orchestration to say this with trembling certainty. Your soul recognized itself in this story, it recognized its wounds, its pauses, its unspoken bitterness. It recognized the places you buried whole seasons of yourself. What you refuse to forgive will follow you. I say this because I learned the truth of it the hard way, in a place where excuses dissolve like mist. There is a quiet inside your chest right now. You feel it pressing. You feel it unsettling the parts of you you've learned to ignore. Don't deny it. You wouldn't still be here if something in you hadn't been shaken awake. I remember the moment after I returned, when breath tore its way back into my lungs and the world felt like a garment I had outgrown. Everything was too loud, too sharp, too temporary. But forgiveness, whispered through trembling lips before thought could catch it, felt eternal. And I realized that if I had carried that fog with me any further, I would have destroyed everything I loved with silence and postponement. He called my name in the dark. And now, without sound, something in you is calling mine. I feel the distance between us closing, not by proximity but by resonance. Because this part of my story, this final offering, was never meant to remain mine. It was entrusted to me with a command, not spoken but etched into the marrow of my ribs: tell them. Tell the ones who are drowning in noise. Tell the ones who are delaying their healing. Tell the ones who are becoming strangers to their own hearts, ****. So I'm telling you now. There is a stillness that reaches you only when you stop running long enough to hear it. That stillness is upon you even now. It hovers like a mirror you didn't ask for. It reveals the relationships you froze, the apologies you rehearsed but never delivered, the bitterness you nursed as if it were a kind of justice. You know exactly who your heart ran from. You know exactly where the fracture lies. Don't look away from this. A person only looks away when they're afraid the truth might actually change them. What you refuse to forgive will follow you. I repeat these words because they echo through me still, long after light withdrew and breath was given back. They echo because bitterness does not die with us, it grows in us, shaping our soul while we convince ourselves we still have time. But time is not the merciful river we imagine. It is a tide that carries both the forgiven and the unforgiven, and when the tide turns, only one of them rises without weight. I'm not here to preach. I'm not here to condemn. I'm here because I saw what happens when we wait too long. I saw what happens when we let pride script our silence. I saw what happens when we let delayed forgiveness become our legacy. And I saw, achingly, what could have been healed with a single surrendered breath. You are here now. Not years from now. Not after regret builds its scaffolding around your heart. Now. And I choose to believe, not as doctrine, but as the trembling instinct of someone who has walked the edge between worlds, that this moment found you because you were not meant to outrun it. He called my name in the dark. And the echo of that call is brushing against your spirit now. You can pretend you don't hear it. You can try to drown it in scrolling and noise and the comfort of numbing habits. But the truth is merciless in its persistence. You heard something. That's why you're still here. And if you click away now, if you bury your spirit under distraction again, then the weight you feel pressing on your chest in this moment will return. And when it returns, it will not be lighter. It will not be easier. It will not wait for a more convenient time. What you refuse to forgive will follow you. This is not fearmongering. This is recognition. You know the truth of it. You have lived the truth of it. A grudge rarely stays where we place it. It creeps into our tone, into our choices, into our self-worth. It becomes the fog around us, the one we pretend we don't notice until it is too thick to escape. But you, right now, you still have breath. You still have the power to unclench your fist. You still have the chance to return to the fire that once softened you. I am asking you to stop. To breathe. To acknowledge the name that rose in your mind when forgiveness was mentioned. Yes, that name. The one you just tried to push back down. This story reached you at a moment your soul cannot ignore. Not because heaven placed it here as a decree, but because your spirit is exhausted from carrying what your pride refuses to release. And since I vowed to speak if breath was returned to me, let me speak one final thing into the quiet between us. You do not have to wait for death to understand life. If you feel the tremor of conviction right now, if your heart tightens with that painful recognition, then know this. Walking away from this video will not silence what has awakened in you. And if you turn from it, if you drown it in noise, that turning will echo into your tomorrow. This is the moment you choose what kind of person you are becoming. If you want to walk with me beyond this moment, If you want words that pull you back to silence, back to sincerity, back to the flame that refuses to die, then come with me into the serene Bible. Not because subscribing grants salvation, but because your soul needs a place where it is not numb to sleep. A place where truth does not whisper, it calls. If you click away and return to distraction, you cannot pretend you weren't moved. You cannot claim ignorance. You felt this. You know you did. What you refuse to forgive will follow you. And I pray, quietly, tremblingly, that you choose release before the weight becomes the story that shapes your ending. Forgive, before the light calls your name.